intelligence services, in your description, CIA, MI6, and SBU, without democratic input, without control by elected leaders, including the President of the United States, and without the interest of the nations at heart. Can you just define sort of a little more precisely what's going on? And let's start with MI6. What is MI6 and what's their role?
Yeah, just to say, the war is being fought with Ukrainian troops dying and with a flow of armaments that has been in the pipeline. That pipeline can stop, and then the war will stop. So it's not, I don't want to imply that the CIA, MI6, BND, SBU can fight the war on their own. They can't. The pipeline exists because it still is the Biden pipeline. It still is whatever Europe is managing. But that pipeline of armaments and finance is basically coming to an end. And Trump should end it definitively. And then Ukrainians literally can't fight. Of course, Europe would try little bits here and there, and if they're stupider and more reckless than one can imagine, they may try more stunts like the ones that they did a couple of weeks ago, which endangered the whole world. But they cannot fight a war afterwards. At that point, what would happen? What would happen is either Russia indeed takes over essentially Ukraine in terms of military occupation, or a peace is reached. One of the two things happens. But that's how to stop the war, is to stop the pipeline of funding. When I talk about the deep state role, they are the cheerleaders. They are the managers. They are the designers. We're not at a stage where they appropriate their own funds. So I don't want to be misunderstood in that way. They cannot continue the war, but they're very powerful in the U.S. system. And in the U.S. system, this war has not been an unpopular war for the U.S. It's been a deep state project for more than 30 years. And the idea was to shield the American people from it, mainly secret. Once in a while, like we had the story about how the CIA was operating all over Ukraine, that the New York Times ran one day. You hear bits and pieces, but the idea is to shield the American people from these wars. The main way we do it is that we don't have our boots on the ground.
Just lack of information.
It's the Ukrainians dying. And so there's no body bags coming home to us. The body bags, if they go back at all, they go back to Ukraine. So the idea is not that they are the ones that can make the war happen. They are the main lobbyists for the war. They are the main protagonists. They are the deep strategists of what should be done. Of course, there's a military component also, not only the intelligence system, but both are playing their role. But the president can stop this. All I'm saying is that it's a lot of political effort to stop it. And he is facing a wall of this deep state opposition. And the way out of that is actually not the tactic that he's been pursuing of getting the Ukrainians to agree, because from the Ukrainian option, the better thing is run around to the CIA, to MI6, to all the other agencies, run around to the European leaders, run to everyone to try to turn Donald Trump. And I'm saying what President Trump has is two things. One is he has constitutional authority. And the second, he and he alone has the direct line to President Putin. And the two superpowers are the protagonists in this fundamentally.
That's right.
And they can end the war between the two of them, not to stop the Ukrainians from fighting, but to stop Ukraine from having the means to fight.
Right.
The Ukrainians can't fight one day without U.S. intelligence, by the way, not just the armaments, but without the intelligence.
But if President Trump gave that order, would it be affected? I mean, who was the last president to control the CIA? Last U.S. president who had actual control over CIA?
No one had actual control over the CIA.
Ever,
because most of the time, with one pertinent, horrible example, presidents have gone along with the CIA. Of course, the one horrible, shocking, disgusting example is John F. Kennedy, who famously said that he would like to take the CIA and tear it into 1,000 pieces. And maybe those were his last words, in essence.
So if you look big picture at the United States, you don't have a real country as long as the CIA. I mean, everything since November of '63 has been post-coup.
I believe that we have not brought this absolutely dangerous part of our government under any effective control for a half century. The last time that there was any slight measure of control and accountability was 1975, 50 years ago, with the Church Committee. Frank Church from Idaho, uniquely in the whole history of the CIA since 1947, did a real investigation. Of course, as soon as they looked under the covers, it was horrifying what they found. They found recklessness, assassinations, coups, regime change operations, MK Ultra, the shocking CIA attempts to create assassins and Manchurian candidates, so-called, and experimentation with hallucinogens for the sake of intelligence operations. Really vulgar, disgusting, awful stuff. That was 1975. That's the last time there has been an actual accounting of what the CIA has done. Let me give just the most pertinent example of what we're talking about. What actually happened in the so-called Maidan, in the coup in 2014? Do we know every point? I happen to know certain things just because I saw certain things with my own eyes. I was told certain things. But has anything been explained in a single day once? Has the New York Times ever run an honest story? Of course not. Has the government ever been called to account even once? Of course not. Has there been a public hearing in the Senate even once of an event that affects our security absolutely fundamentally? Of course not. And I could go on with 50 examples like this, where the deep state is unaccountable, where there are no answers, where nothing is heard. Yesterday, we heard about Area 51. We heard about how the U.S. military concocted phony stories, which lived for decades, in order to hide secret weapons development programs. Our government lies every day, the security state. And the danger of that is that, don't call that national security. This is national insecurity. We have never been more endangered than we are today. It's so weird. We should be the safest country in the history of the world. And we would be if it were not for the risk of nuclear war. And yet we're closer to that than at any time because of the stupidity, I have to say, of these deep state, unexamined, unaccountable strategies of going up against other major powers in the most reckless ways. And I use the language because we're just a few days after an absolutely disgusting, unacceptable intelligence agency operation attacking strategic bombers deep inside Russia.
Well, how long before there's like an attack that Russia can't ignore and that does lead? I mean,
yes.
It seems like all the incentives are in place for the Ukrainians working with MI6 and CIA to push us into a global conflict with Russia.
Absolutely. And if it's not Ukraine, it's Israel or someone else. There's so many. Our foreign policy is so suborned, so much not in America's interest, so much used by the military industrial state or particular lobbies in favor of particular places. We could be yanked into war for absolutely no consequential reasons whatsoever, when we should be enjoying the height of our national security. And in 1991, I witnessed it with my own eyes. We had everything we could have ever dreamt. Our erstwhile foe, and that's another long story why they were the foe, but our erstwhile foe of the Cold War said, we don't want to be an enemy. We want to be friends. We want to open up. We want to reform. We want to be with you. In fact, of course, famously, Putin said, we want to be part of NATO. And he did. And it's no joke. And when Putin came in, by the way, he was completely pro-American and pro-European.
I know.
Completely.
Well, he still is the most pro-Western leader that country will ever have again.
Yeah. No, it's unbelievable. We can't accept peace for an answer. But that's why the president of the United States has to stop the war machine.
To the second conflict, raging that, as you just said, has the potential to engulf the world, and that's Iran, which is obviously connected to a bunch of other conflicts around that region. Where are we in averting a war with Iran right now?
Good news, of course, is that President Trump is negotiating. He's resisting Netanyahu's constant call for the U.S. to go to war with Iran. And that call by Bibi for yet another war in the Middle East is yet another of these long-term deep state projects. This is an Israeli project primarily, but the U.S. Has been a party to Netanyahu's wars going back essentially 30 years. Netanyahu came to office as Prime Minister of Israel first in 1996. He did it with the backing of U.S. political advisors, many of whom became senior U.S. officials. And he did it on the basis of a strategy, political strategy called Clean Break, back in 1996. And what Clean Break meant was a clean break with the idea of the two-state solution. So the two-state solution means that there should be a state of Israel and a state of Palestine living side by side. That goes back to the United Nations 1947 partition plan idea. Netanyahu leads a political party, the Likud, and a political alliance which holds that Israel should dominate all of the lands of that region, including Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, but also into Lebanon and Syria, and borders undefined, but a very expansive view of what Israel's rule should be. That's a quite outlandish and outrageous idea to most of the world, and I would say to most Americans who say, look, just make peace and get on with it. And the Palestinians, who are 8 million people, should have their place, and the Israelis, who are 8 million people, should have their place, and get on with it. But this idea of the clean break is, no, we don't want to get on with it. We want to control everything. And Netanyahu's philosophy, or not philosophy, but his strategy, because it isn't just tactics, it's strategy. The strategy is, we know there'll be a lot of resistance. Our domination over the Palestinian people, apartheid regime, ethnic cleansing when we can get away with it, and so forth. So we're going to face opposition. We will face even militant opposition, Hamas or Hezbollah, and so forth. But Netanyahu pointed out something which is actually correct. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, he says these militants basically don't operate on their own. That's true in general of these groups that we fight. They are state-backed. And it has been true that Hezbollah and Hamas, for example, were backed by Iran for most of this period. And so the idea of Netanyahu is, don't make peace. We want to win. We want all the territory. We don't accept two states. We don't accept Palestinian rights and so forth. We will win, but we don't win by defeating militant groups. We win by destroying the governments that support those groups. And that means war. And it really means endless wars. And the U.S. became the complicit party to this because of the U.S. deep state vision of that Israel is our battleship or aircraft carrier in the Middle East, that it is our strategic asset in the Middle East, and because of the Zionist lobby, which is itself a complicated political concoction in the United States. But in any event, the U.S. completely bought into the Netanyahu idea, which is war after war after war. And it's not well understood, but it should be, because we've been told pretty clearly by no less than General Wesley Clark, for example, who was the commander of NATO forces, that the Pentagon has had a list of wars to prosecute that essentially is Netanyahu's list, actually. After 9/11 in particular, that went into overdrive. The U.S., as Wesley Clark was told, and as he subsequently explained to us, and as others have also explained to us. An Air Force commander named Dennis Fritz, who wrote a very important book called Deadly Betrayal in 2024, telling the same story in essence. The Pentagon had a list which the neoconservatives or the deep state of the U.S. would carry out, which was we would take out the regimes in opposition to Israel. And those regimes included, it's a long list, of course, not only the Palestinians, that's the point, but also Syria. That was the regime of Bashar al-Assad, which was viewed by Netanyahu and by the U.S. Deep state as an Iranian client. So Syria would be one. Lebanon would be another. Iraq under Saddam Hussein would be another. The Iranian regime would be a fourth. And then, believe it or not, three countries in Africa, which are Islamic countries that supported the Palestinian cause. And that was Muammar Gaddafi's Libya. That was Somalia on the Horn of Africa. And that was Sudan, which was a Sharia state in the 1990s. Well, God damn, we've been to war with all of them except Iran, and not by accident. The list is literally the guide in this case. And again, it's not simple for Americans to connect the dots because these stories are not told, they're not explained, they're not debated, they're not voted. These are presidential actions by and large, one after another. So let's go through them step by step. One is the Iraq War, 2003. We now know not only was it under wrong pretenses, weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, it was under completely phony, concocted, false pretenses. And in 2002, the Pentagon actually did a PR analysis of how to sell the war to the American people, a unit by a guy named Abe Shulsky. And he came up with a PR strategy, literally public relations, that the right narrative was weapons of mass destruction. So this is not, as it was subsequently told to us, oh, we made a mistake. We didn't know that Saddam didn't have them. This was a concocted narrative in 2002 to justify a war in 2003, to take away a regime that Netanyahu deemed to be hostile to Israel. Then in 2011, again, something very basic, but not understood by the American people because, again, the government lies and cheats and doesn't explain. The U.S. went to war in Syria. Now, this was not a declared war. There was never a presidential speech, but the president said, President Obama said, Assad must go. Okay, every time you hear an American president say some other leader must go, say, oh my God, here we go again. And the president signed a presidential finding called Operation Timber Sycamore, assigning the CIA with the task of organizing, training, financing, and arming an insurgency to overthrow Assad. That came to fruition just in recent months. That's how the new government came in.
Yes, unfortunately, in December of 2024.
Yes, unfortunately, very much unfortunately, it was after 13 years of war that killed hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed sites in Syria that date back thousands of years. In other words, it was a destruction of one of the heritage sites of humanity because Netanyahu said, that guy's too close to Iran. We need to take him out. Then,
wait, can I ask you to pause?
Yes.
So, and by the way, and flooded Europe with migrants too.
That's
completely
another
destabilized Europe forever.
That's another fascinating story. As all these migrants came in and wrecked European politics, not one politician in Europe said, oh, the United States shouldn't be engaged in an overthrow of Syria. They can't connect the goddamn dots because everything's a lie. All the narratives are narratives.
So when Obama comes out and says Assad must go, which I think in retrospect was a pivot point in modern history, like that, because Syria is not Yemen. It's on the Mediterranean. I mean, it's
by the way, Syria was viewed, up until then, there's an IMF report, which I like to cite, of 2009, praising the authorities on their growth strategy and reform. This is crazy. This is deciding to overthrow a country. and without an iota of public discussion. This is Hillary.
But a nice country, a civilized country with lots of doctors and accountants and scientists, and it's a real place.
And of course, you paint the dictator to be the worst evil ever, and
his
so
wife
forth.
had just appeared on the cover of Vogue when
right. But whatever one says about Assad and so forth, the United States should not be overthrowing the government through a CIA operation.
Of course not.
And hundreds of thousands dead.
And it was a domino that led to greater human suffering and the destabilizing of Europe itself. So
absolutely.
It was a really, really big deal. I just want to go back and linger for a second on why.
Why?
Yeah, why? I mean, it was sort of a non sequitur. All of a sudden, Obama stands up and is like, Assad must go. Assad who? Why do we care about Assad?
Syria's on the list. It's Iranian influence. We got to take out Assad.
So it's purely for Israel, you're saying?
I think very substantially. I'll tell you, again, Dennis Fritz, very interesting. He's a very smart former Air Force commander who, strangely enough, resigned from the Air Force in 2003 because he couldn't get a clear explanation of why we were fighting Iraq. And he's a very nice man. And he said, I can't lead my troops if I can't explain. And he was told from above, well, because we have the orders to. This order came from the White House.
Yeah.
And so he said, I can't lead troops under these circumstances. So he resigned. Then he was called back in 2005 to the Pentagon for a remarkable reason. And that was that Douglas Feith, who was a senior Pentagon official, a neocon close to Netanyahu, the whole shebang, said, we want to declassify papers around the Iraq war. And okay, so Feith came back because he was an expert on classification and security issues and so forth. Why did Feith want to do that? Because he was writing his memoirs. And so he wanted to include documents in his book. So he hired Feith, and Feith hired Dennis Fritz. And Fritz got to read everything. Where'd this war come from? What are all the communications? So he's a little bit like Daniel Ellsberg in the Pentagon Papers. Suddenly he's sitting there in 2005 reading all the files. And he only wrote about this 20 years later in this book, Deadly Betrayal. And I got to speak with him at length and interviewed him. He's a wonderful, gentle soul. And he said he was shocked by what he read because he's reading it and he realizes this is Bibi's war. We're going to war because Israel said so. And Feith was Bibi's man in the Pentagon.
But how could Douglas Feith, who's an American citizen and an American official at the American Pentagon, do the bidding of a foreign government like that?
Well, because America has been doing Israel's bidding for 30 years, because of the Israel lobby, because of the concocted idea that this is U.S. security.
But sending young people to die? I mean, that's a pretty heavy thing to do.
As long as it's not American people to die. Well, in that case, it was. No, in that case, it was more heavy. But actually, I apologize for that statement because most of the wars, we don't send our own Americans. We send their young people to die. But in the Iraq war, if you ask how he could do it, okay, it's a good question. That war, I can't use the proper word that I would like to use because it's absolutely obscene. But that war was so phony, so completely unjustified, so reckless. That was a real turning point because it was so brazenly wrongheaded. And who was the great cheerleader of that war in the fall of 2002? And I encourage people, go online and watch it on tape. Watch Bibi Netanyahu say how wonderful this war will be because Saddam will fall, and that will lead to a chain reaction across the Middle East of bringing down the tyrants. Bibi Netanyahu is full of, and I also won't say it, but this is how he's been for 30 years. And the U.S. has done his bidding. And in that case, and again, I apologize for my slip. Yes, we sent our own to die out of complete phony pretenses, not wrong, not mistaken, not an illusion, but because of a PR exercise to fight a war, because we must understand that behind everything we're talking about, whether it's expanding NATO, whether it's bringing down Russia, whether it is fighting and bringing down Saddam or Assad or Gaddafi, the arrogance in Washington is the first point of reference. They don't believe this is hard. They don't believe it's costly. They don't believe it will go wrong. They screw up every time. They fail every time, and they get promoted every time. They don't go away when they lose. Look at Lindsey Graham. He's been wrong on every single war, on every single piece of American foreign policy, and he's still standing up there telling us what to do because there's no accountability.
But also no shame or inner compass. I mean, you would think.
Oh, of course, no shame.
But don't you feel shame when you're wrong, especially when
you try to be right? Absolutely.
Your bad decisions hurt people. I mean, gosh.
Well, we don't have that. We don't have any reflection or accountability, and that is literally the case on all of this. When you go back to bringing down Assad in Operation Timber Sycamore, I think I've checked a couple of times. I think the New York Times, again, I refer to that because it used to be the paper I read. I think they mentioned it 3 times from 2012 onward. That's all. So how can the American people understand any of it? And interestingly, amazingly, Russia came into the Syrian conflict in 2015. And what was our reaction? How dare Russia interfere? You know, in other words, the phoniest narrative that there goes Putin again, when we have been inside for 4 years, militarily trying to overthrow the other government. Then came, just after that, by the way, after Assad must go, then they took out Gaddafi. That was a NATO operation in which the U.S., France, and the United States.
I'm sorry, Jeff, I'm going to have to stop you right there. It was a NATO operation. I know that NATO is a defensive alliance.
That's, yes.
So why would, defending the North Atlantic, why would NATO be killing leaders in Africa?
Because we needed to have the French, the British, and the Americans together to murder the leader of Libya and overthrow the government. That's why. And so
did Libya get a lot better?
Libya has been in nonstop war since then. Again, profound destruction, massive loss of life, and ongoing civil war. And since I know many, many leaders around the world, I've asked them repeatedly why Gaddafi in 2011. And you know what they tell me? The leaders who are as close as can be to this, we don't know. Maybe Sarkozy hated him. Maybe Gaddafi funded Sarkozy's campaign. We don't know what this was really about. I've talked to recently an African president very close to the scene, a very senior former African president who said to me, Jeff, I can't give you the answer to that question. I've asked. He's been involved. I'll tell you another thing quite interesting, by the way, about these wars. In 2012, after the Syrian war broke out because of the United States. By the way, they say, no, it was the Syrian people, the Free Syrian Army, and so forth. Yes. Tell me about it. Who armed them? Who paid for them? Who trained them? Who gave them military bases? Of course, this is a CIA operation. Stop talking romantically about this domestic insurrection. This was a government operation. Okay. After it started, the UN tried to stop the war because failing to stop it, there would be massive death and destruction. And in fact, there have been hundreds of thousands of deaths after the fact. So a person I absolutely loved, Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the UN, went as the special envoy of the Secretary General to Syria. And he met all the parties. And Kofi Annan was a brilliant personality and a brilliant statesman. And he told me just before resigning in the spring of 2012, Jeff, there was a negotiated agreement. Peace could have come, but there was one party that said no, and that was the United States. And I asked, why did the United States block the peace agreement? He said, because the United States insisted that the only agreement it would sign would be one in which Assad would leave the first day. And Kofi Annan said to me, when I tried to say to the Americans that, well, there will be a process and under the agreement, there will be elections and so forth, so there'll be a process. Said, no, we will only agree if it's the first day. So this is how American arrogance works, how you end up with 500,000 dead, how you end up with whatever this regime is in Syria right now. It took 14 years. It didn't come out of the blue. It was an American operation from the start. It then morphed in several ways, but this is a long-term story. And all of this is to say, And I mentioned not just Libya, but also Somalia, also Sudan, where the United States, it did an absolutely amazing thing. It supported an insurgency in what was then southern Sudan, to break apart Sudan, because Sudan was an Islamist state supporting Palestine, blah, blah, blah. So we had to destroy Sudan. And they funded an insurgency for a long time. And then the United States, quote, brokered a peace to give independence to South Sudan. Okay. The American geniuses have created an instability so great that we not only have two Sudans, Sudan and South Sudan, we have civil wars in both Sudans. So this is ongoing, nonstop, massive deaths through another concoction of clean break, Bibi, the deep state. This is a disaster.
But it all goes back to the same root. And the last country on that list, as you said at the outset, is Iran.
That's it.
We were hearing this week that Iran is just weeks away from building a nuclear weapon. And so we need to take out the nuclear sites. We need to affect regime change in Iran. I feel like I've been hearing that Iran is weeks away from a nuclear weapon for at least 25 years.
Yes, at verbatim, at least a decade, and for longer in substance, yes.
Is Iran weeks away from building a nuclear weapon? Does Iran want a nuclear weapon? Will Iran get a nuclear weapon? What is the truth about Iran?
Iran does not want a nuclear weapon. Iran's neighbors, like the Saudis and others in the Gulf, do not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Iran's major ally, Russia, does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And Iran doesn't want a nuclear weapon. But Iran does not want to be defeated militarily by Israel, does not want to be bombed to hell by Israel, and does not want to be sanctioned to death economically by the United States, which the U.S. has been doing now for endless years. So Iran has said for 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, unequivocally, we don't want a nuclear weapon. We want an agreement with you. We want you to lift sanctions, and we want a no nuclear system, and with all verifications and monitoring and safety as well. We want to have our nuclear power plants. We want our own military. We're not going to disarm in a region where Israel attacks every country in the region. And by the way, where we have other enemies as well. So we are not going to unilaterally disarm in our region, but we do not want a nuclear weapon. The truth is that has been known for a dozen years in detail at the highest levels. And
so what's the problem? That seems like a pretty good basis for an agreement.
The problem, there is no problem in reaching a sound agreement. And by the way, with the nuclear power plants, which are in dozens of countries, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has successfully monitored and set up absolutely rigorous monitoring, and Iran is open to that and has said so repeatedly, and has said it would work with the neighbors on the fuel supply chains and all the rest. There is no obstacle to this. And I think we're close to an agreement with Iran, in fact, thanks to President Trump, because Netanyahu says, no, we need to bomb the hell out of them. We need to defeat them like we defeated Saddam and Assad and Gaddafi. We need to take out this evil regime. That's his line.
So it's not about nukes, what you're saying. You're saying it's not about nukes, it's about regime change.
I think, for sure. And that's been true all along.
So why not just say that? Why lie? Why does Fox News tell me every single, not that I have a TV, but I hear Fox News is telling everyone every day they're moments away from a nuclear. We cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Day after day after day. Why not just say no?
I think, by the way, that's true. And Iran would agree with that. Okay? Yes, that's what we're saying.
So, but if you went on television right now, if you were back on your old perch on Morning Joe and you said, actually, Iran doesn't want a nuclear weapon, they would accuse you immediately of being an agent of Iran.
They might. Because maybe someone would tell them in their little earpiece to say that. Because that's how it works.
But you're saying that's true. I mean, you're acting like that's like a non-controversial statement. No, Iran doesn't want to bomb. They've said they don't. They just don't want to get attacked.
They have said for years, remove our sanctions, normalize relations, stop trying to overthrow us, tell your bulldog Israel to stop threatening us with war, and we can have perfectly normal relations, and we don't want a nuclear weapon. It's a much bigger headache than we want. We don't want it.
But that is not the story that any American news channel tells ever.
I'm shocked. We live in the world of narratives. You know, for many years, the Iranians were asking, how do we reach the Biden White House? How do we want to open up channels? We want to negotiate. Of course, they wouldn't talk to them. It was, we know the president now, I mean, we knew then, but now it's confirmed. The president wasn't in any shape to talk to anybody. And the administration was the biggest foreign policy failure of one can imagine. But the Iranians have been saying all along, we want to negotiate. And as soon as President Trump was elected, at least I got inquiries. Do you know anyone in the White House? Do you know anyone in the president's team? How can we make contact? That's not the behavior you make if you're relentlessly trying to go to a nuclear bomb.
So what about the story that you hear endlessly that Iran is planning to nuke the United States, if that's on their agenda?
Huh?
Yeah, right.
Huh?
So you consider that like insane?
I consider that so bewildering. If a grown-up says that, we need to have a long heart-to-heart talk about a lot of facts. But that is simply the most absurd imaginable idea. Iran, by the way, is a civilization of, by usual count, 5,200 years. Persia is the usual name given
oldest continuous in the world.
Iran, yes, it's arguably the longest continuous civilization, though many jump up and say, no, we are. Maybe the Georgians say it or the Egyptians say it. So I won't get into arguments among my friends, except this is actually a great civilization that has lasted for 5,000 years. They're not going to bring it to an end by bombing the United States and having Persia or Iran disappear from the world map, literally, physically, by atom, by such an attack. So it's not.
So why are we going through all this? I mean, the full attention of huge parts of the U.S. government, billions and billions and billions and trillions over the years of American tax dollars have gone to responding to this threat. We have bases all around the region, all focused on Iran, which we maintain, including a huge one in Qatar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of this effort by the United States focused on this Iranian threat that you claim doesn't exist.
Remember that Iran was first of all, Iran was a democratic country. In 1953, the prime minister at the time, named Mossadegh, had this absolutely outlandish idea, which was that the oil under their ground belonged to Iranians. This was a very weird idea because the British knew it belonged to the British. The Americans expected that it belonged to the Americans in the new age. And so CIA and MI6 overthrew the Iranian democracy. Then we installed a police state known as the Shah of Iran and SAVAK, its supposed intelligence and enforcement authority from 1953 to 1978, when the Shah was dying of cancer and he was a hated figure in Iran. Jimmy Carter was talked into taking him into into the United States, and that provoked the reaction and the taking of hostages of American hostages in Iran. And the Iranian Revolution was taken badly by the United States, but Iran had been our fortress. And why Iran? Because this was part of our anti-Soviet effort. Right. This was part of our Cold War effort. So Iran turned from police state ally to America's foe and Israel's foe. And by the way, in 1980, the United States and 1981 in particular, the United States armed Saddam Hussein massively to go kill Iranians. So we told Iraq, go invade Iran. And we supported an absolutely bloody, disastrous war between Iraq and Iran. We loved it. It was the two scorpions fighting in the bottle, killing each other.
Fought in part by children.
On American, on the American dime. So our position towards Iran has been an aggression since 1953. Actually, remember, the American deep state doesn't care about any other people at all. Whatever happens to them, it doesn't care about the Ukrainian people. It doesn't care about the people we're, quote, saving. It cares about whatever fight it's in. The fight might be against Russia, in which case the Ukrainians are used. The fight might be for Israel, in which case some other jihadists are used, whatever.
Or the Kurds.
The Kurds or whoever is convenient at the time. So Iran is kind of amazingly incurring this for 75 years and for the last dozen years saying, peace, come on, make peace. President Trump is close to it right now. Again, as in all the other cases we have been discussing, the deep state narrative is deep. It's long-standing. It's not shallow. It's pretty much empty. It's pretty much concocted, but it's deep. And so in order to overcome the deep state, in this case, it's the Israel or Zionist lobby because it's got a pretty complicated domestic heritage and base. In order to overcome what has been 20 years of wars of choice in the Middle East and to stop them, it requires a lot of political capital and attention by President Trump. Just like in Ukraine, he's absolutely on the right track, but he's getting attacked by everybody for being on the right track. And he's trying to express America's real interest. America cannot have a war with Iran, by the way. It would lead to a regional war. It would be costly, bloody, threatening. And on January 17th of this year, Iran signed a security agreement with Russia. So it would just open up another front of potential nuclear war. President Trump's smart. He's trying to avoid this. Everyone's shouting at him, don't avoid it, go to war. And for the president to prevail, he has all the authority he needs. But this noise is incessant. And the arrogance of a Lindsey Graham or the American Congress that thinks we can do whatever we want, wherever we want, and win whenever we want, when everything has been trillions of dollars of cost and one disaster after another, that arrogance actually continues until today. It's not fear, it's arrogance that's the fundamental driver.
In the face of, I mean, they haven't won a war in 80 years, so the U.S. military has not won a war in 80 years. So I'm not attacking anyone. I say that with sadness, but I don't understand on what basis this optimism arises.
The optimism is misplaced, let us say, because these people have gotten us into one debacle after another. And if, when Lindsey, I'm going to pick on Lindsey Graham again because he's been the biggest warmonger in the Senate, if when he speaks, if there were little logos on the screen, Iraq war supporter, this war, if people understood, okay, this guy's told you the wrong thing 5 wars in a row, then we let him speak and let everyone understand this guy gets it wrong every single time. And that's true of most of these warmongers. But I think, just to say, this will continue, unfortunately, as long as we don't have peace a little bit further to the west of Iran, and that is we need Israel and Palestine, 2 states living in peace, and not this plan that is the clean break that is breaking us, that goes back 30 years. In other words, the harder work even than avoiding the war with Iran is the United States finally telling Israel, come on, there's a limit. You reached it. You exceeded it. Those words need to be uttered, and they haven't been uttered to this day. 53 million deaths of women and children and everyone else. The United States needs to say, you crossed the line.
Say that to the Prime Minister of Israel.
Says that to the Israeli people and to the Prime Minister. We no longer support this. And that's hard in American politics.
Why?
It's hard, again, because the narrative for decades has been the opposite, because Americans don't understand how much we have paid for these terrible, absurd, deadly Israeli-led or provoked or desired wars, and because there are deep beliefs and misunderstandings about the region that are just reproduced and replicated over time. Again, just like Iran, I deal every day with diplomats from around the world. It's my privilege and good luck that I speak with leaders all over the Middle East, for example. in Egypt, in Saudi, in Jordan, in Turkey, in Iran, all over the Middle East. They have said to me for years and years and years, if there is a state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel, we normalize relations with Israel. We, of course, support the mutual security of the two states. We do business. We do everything. And they have said that not only privately to me at length, explaining the situation, but publicly in what's called the Arab Peace Initiative, which goes back to 2002. So it's been 23 years where the Arab states have been saying clearly, when Israel says there's no one to talk to, there's everyone to talk to. Everyone wants peace, quiet, and economic development. Believe it or not, they want to live their lives. They want their children to grow up. They actually want to have building, construction. They're worried about their physical lives, their jobs, everything. And they want peace. And they know that there can't be economic development unless there's peace. So if you ask, why is it? There is no deep reason why there isn't two states living peacefully side by side. The idea that Hamas, this is a narrative. This is a gimmick. This is a lie. Hamas would go the first day if the United States said, yes, we support a Palestinian state, but it's got to be peaceful. It's got to be disarmed. That's fine. Everyone agrees with this. No one disagrees with this. But what we don't hear and get an explanation of, and this is what people need to understand, Netanyahu's completely uninterested in that. Totally uninterested in that. He doesn't say, oh, we need to defeat Hamas, then there can be a Palestinian state. No, of course not, because that's fundamentally not the idea. Fundamentally, the idea is we defeat Hamas, we rule. Of course we rule. This is ours.
But the problem is, leaving aside you know, who's right, who's wrong, the philosophical and moral justifications for this or that policy, you have millions of people living there.
Well, but that's the point, exactly.
Right, so as a practical matter, what do you do with them? I mean, even people get caught up in like 1947 and, you know, settlers from Eastern Europe that are mad about this. You could ignore all history and just pretend the world started January 1st, 2025, and you've got millions of people living there. What are you going to do with them? I don't understand.
You are so correct. There are 8 million Jews. There are 8 million Palestinian Arabs.
So what's the plan? I just want to know what the plan is.
The plan...
You can't get to the plan. The second you ask, it's like, oh, you're working for Qatar.
The answer is simple. The plan is something else. The answer is simple. Two places, one for the Palestinians, one for the Israelis. That's simple. And it's not even hard. And I've had generals from Israel recently telling me, no, it's not even a security issue. And here's how the borders go and all the rest. The plan is, how do you overcome the remaining U.S. complete intransigence on this? That's the
But
issue.
why do we care? It's in our interest. So that's what's confusing. Like, we don't have an inherent national interest there. There's no oil there, for example. It's not like it's an energy concern for us. So why do we care? And what are the options? What do you do with 8 million people? You can't send them somewhere? Like, what are they thinking?
You said the magic word, and I hope that President Trump gets this because it's his core philosophy. Peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians is America's interest. Again, not even on moral grounds, just the most practical grounds.
Yeah.
Keep us out of nuclear war. Keep us out of regional war. Have economic development, have business, everything.
No more 9/11.
Normalizations.
Osama bin Laden said that he planned 9/11 in part because of what was happening between Israel and the Palestinians and America's support for Israel. Now, no one wanted to hear that, but that's called you names if you said it. Yeah. I'm not on Osama bin Laden's side. That's obviously. I totally disapprove of Osama bin Laden. But that's a fact. So, like, why would we want to expose ourselves to more of that? Like, why not try and get this fixed?
This is the key to every issue we're talking about. What is America's national interest in the context of Ukraine and Russia? Is it for Ukraine to be blowing up Russian strategic bombers, or is it for Ukraine to be a neutral country without NATO? It's the second. What is America's national interest vis-a-vis Iran? It is no nuclear weapons in Iran and peace, no war. What is America's interest in Israel and Palestine. It is 8 million Palestinians for Palestine and 8 million Israelis living in Israel in peace. And please, if I could say it this way, shut up a little bit. No more wars that we're dragged into. You guys just live. That's America's real interest. So if the president follows through on America's national interest, not on the grandiosity that we can do anything we want, anywhere we want, because we are the United States of America, and our mission is to defeat Russia, or our mission is to defeat Iran, or our mission is Greater Israel. If we follow the American national interest, it's absolutely straightforward what to do. It is no war with Iran, a negotiated treaty. It is 2 states, Israel and Palestine. It is a neutral Ukraine. President Trump has all of that close at hand, but everyone requires his attention. This is hard because every one of them confronts a narrative that's 30 years old or 50 years old, that is deeply entrenched, that is fundamentally based on the premise that America can do what it wants anywhere in the world because it's all powerful. At the core of everything, Tucker, is a kind of arrogance of power that has been proved to be wrong from Vietnam, Afghanistan, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Syria, Iraq. It's not that we're hopeless and helpless, and I'm not defeatist in that way. I'm saying that if you choose the wrong battles, you can't win those battles.
Right, that's exactly
if you choose
right.
battles that are not in America's interest, you'll go away because they're not. Afghanistan wasn't fundamentally in America's interest, or Iraq
Right.
wasn't fundamentally in America's interest, or Ukraine wasn't fundamentally in America's interest. And by the way, that's also not isolationism. That's just being smart, prudent, normal, and also recognizing, don't be so afraid. Our only risk in the United States, honestly, now we know it's not the UFOs. That was a concocted thing of the Air Force. Our only risk is a nuclear war. Stay clear of a nuclear war. Please stay clear of these ultimate confrontations. Don't fight Russia to the end. It's a great power. You can live side by side with it. Same with China. Come on. Just be normal and we can have secure, prosperous lives for all of us.
When you overstate your power evaporates. The U.S. is so much less powerful than it was before the
We
invasion
are
of
at so much
Afghanistan.
more risk
I know.
objectively
I know.
than we were before. And anyone that measures risk, I often refer to this doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which says we're closer to nuclear Armageddon than ever before in human history. This is crazy. We should be as far away. I was there, as I said, in the Kremlin in December 1991. The doomsday clock was 17 minutes away from midnight because we have peace. Now we're 89 seconds to midnight. Are you kidding? How did we squander this? Because we did so many Israeli-provoked wars, because we had to expand NATO to Russia's border, blah, blah, blah. None of this is for America's interest.
No.
And it's objectively the case.
Let me ask you one last question. You said that most of the storylines, the narratives, are 30 years old, and I think that's exactly right. It does feel like it could be 1995 again. But there is one new one, and that is that Qatar, Qatar, very small Gulf state, wholly within Saudi, I think the largest natural gas field in the world, biggest American air base in the region, that country is like a powerful enemy of the United States and is controlling America's media, controlling America's higher education system, and that most bad things and all bad opinions come from Qatar and Qatari propaganda. Are you familiar with this argument?
Not quite, but I am familiar with Qatar.
Yeah. So what do you assess Qatar's role in the United States? Are they controlling our media, do you think?
I don't lose sleep over it. To tell you the truth, it's I haven't heard it put exactly that way, but
You gotta get on the internet more.
I know.
Jeff.
I've been going to Qatar for a while. They gave the president a nice plane, and it's not a danger to the American people. You know, if we were to calm down a little bit, we actually could have all the safety in the world we want. This is actually the truth. If we drop our angst on big bad Russia. Actually, we didn't have a chance to talk about it this time. Maybe another time, big bad China, which is also not going to invade the United States, not going to threaten us, not going to go to war with us. They're trying to deal with aging, and they've got their declining population and many other things. Not that they're falling apart. It's a very impressive civilization, but they're not a threat to the United States, honestly. And Iran is not a threat. And now I'll add another country that's not a threat, Qatar. By the way, there are 193 UN member states, and I would say 192 of them are not threats to the United States if we just behave with some prudence and don't get ourselves edging towards nuclear war.
Jeffrey Sachs, thank you very much.
Great to be with you.
So it turns out that YouTube is suppressing this show. On one level, that's not surprising. That's what they do. But on another level, it's shocking. With everything that's going on in the world right now, all the change taking place in our economy and our politics, with the wars we're on the cusp of fighting right now, Google has decided you should have less information rather than more. And that is totally wrong. It's immoral. What can you do about it? Well, we could whine about it. That's a waste of time. We're not in charge of Google. Or we could find a way around it, a way that you could actually get information that is true, not intentionally deceptive. The way to do that on YouTube, we think, is to subscribe to our channel. Subscribe. Hit the little bell icon to be notified when we upload and share this video. That way you'll have a much higher chance of hearing actual news and information. So we hope that you'll do that.